lesson uh, during this polar coordinates. So we are given the rectangular coordinates and we are supposed to find the polar coordinates. Now to find the polar coordinates, you need to use the Pythagoras theorem. So you use the square root of x square plus y square and you found out the length of this r, the polar coordinate. Now, however, we need to find also what is the angle with the x-axis. This x-axis, angle with the x-axis is given by tangent theta equals to y over x. And when we calculate this tangent theta, the answer given by the calculator is actually an acute angle. They will not
Okay.
give you angle more than 90 degrees, or in some calculators they give you more than 90, but more than 180 you cannot get the angle more than 180 degrees. So how to find this angle here, this angle? Okay, so I'm
Mhm.
going to show you how to find the angle today, right?
Okay.
Where are we now? Oh, here. Okay, I make this bigger. Then we look at this one. Okay, right. So in order to know how to find the angle from the calculator, you cannot get the angle. So you have to undergo certain method to find the answer. So I told you earlier that the Cartesian plane, the xy rectangular coordinates, they are divided into four quadrants. The first quadrant is on the top left hand corner. Top left hand, right hand corner, sorry. This is the first quadrant. Now the first quadrant is the angle between 0 and 90 degrees. So this
Mhm.
line is 0 degrees. So this line here is 90 degrees. So our angle is represented by this line, this OA. Our angle is
Okay.
represented by OA. It is the angle between the x-axis and this black line here. So this angle is between 0 and 90 degrees. So we take, for example, like this, okay, like this. This angle is 42 42.9 degrees. Of course, we may have other angles, the size of the angle can change, but it is still inside the first quadrant. Okay, somewhere here between 0 and 90, it's still inside the first quadrant. Okay, uh, right. So in the first quadrant, we take one example that is the angle 42 degrees, 42.9 degrees. That is the angle indicated by this blue line. Okay, this angle is 42 degrees, 42.9 degrees. Okay, now this 42.9 degrees, it has this is the coordinate of the point A. The y
Okay.
coordinate is 6.59. The x coordinate is 7.09. Now let's say if I want to find the sine of this angle. Sine is opposite, that means this dotted line,
Mhm.
divided by the hypotenuse. Okay. Now, if you look at the y coordinate, I better use the caption. Okay, I better use this one. Okay, right. Now, if you look at the sine theta is defined as opposite over hypotenuse. So this is our opposite and this is our hypotenuse. Okay. Now you see that the sine of this opposite is positive 6.59. It is
Yep.
positive 6.59. And the hypotenuse is always positive. The hypotenuse is positive. So the sine of the angle in the first quadrant, this is our first quadrant, is a positive number. Is a positive number. Is this okay?
Yep.
Okay. Now, let's say if I want to find the cosine of this angle, this acute angle in the first quadrant, the Adjacent, this is the adjacent. This is this line. This x coordinate is the adjacent. The x coordinate is a positive number. Is a positive number. The hypotenuse is also positive, right? So the quotient of these two number is positive. So we say that the value of cosine theta in the first quadrant is positive. Okay. Now we look at the angle, the trigonometric function that we usually see, tangent theta. Tangent theta is opposite over adjacent. Now in the first quadrant, the opposite is the x coordinate, the y coordinate is a positive number, and the x
Mm.
coordinate is also a positive number. So as a result, we have this tangent theta is a positive ratio. Tangent theta is a positive ratio. So you see the reason why it is, why we always say, oh, in the first quadrant sine is positive, cosine positive, tangent positive. Now this is the reason, because of the coordinates. Both the x coordinate and the y coordinate in the first quadrant is positive. We now look at the second quadrant. I hide all this first so that you will not get confused with the second quadrant. Okay, so we look at the second quadrant. Okay, the second quadrant is between this line, the positive y-axis, and this line, the
Negative.
negative x-axis. So the angle in the second quadrant, they are angles between 90 and 180 degrees.
Okay.
Angle in the second quadrant, they are angles between 90 and 180. So let us look at one example of an angle in the second quadrant. Okay, so this is the angle in the second quadrant. We don't measure the angle this way. You see the green line here, the green line here.
Yep.
It is used to represent the size of the angle in the second quadrant. So this is the size of the angle. And how much is the size? The size is 100 and
139 degree.
39 degrees, 39.83 degrees. So this angle is actually measured from the positive x-axis. So you go anti-clockwise. That is the size of the angle in the second quadrant. Okay. Okay. So now let us look at the coordinates of this angle in the second quadrant. So the coordinates, they are, the y coordinate is positive because it is above the x-axis. However, the x coordinate is a negative number because it is on the left hand side. So in this quadrant, we have two numbers. They are, one is positive and one is negative. So we're going to look at how to call this line here. Now this is the angle, and actually the acute angle is over here. And this is the opposite. This is the adjacent. This side is the adjacent. And finally, the hypotenuse is this black line here.
Okay.
Black line here. Now, if you want to know what is the trigonometric ratio of an angle in the second quadrant, then we look at this. Okay. Sine theta. Sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. Okay. What is the sign of this length here? The opposite.
Positive.
Positive, correct. Very good. This is positive. Then hypotenuse is always positive. So as a result, the trigonometric ratio sine theta is a positive number. Now, if you want to look at the cosine, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Now, you see here, the adjacent of this angle in the second quadrant is a negative number. It is a negative number. Hypotenuse, always positive. So, as a result, negative divided by positive, the trigonometric ratio cosine theta in the second quadrant is a negative number. Then we look at tangent. Tangent is opposite over adjacent.
Yes,
Opposite
yes.
is this length here, the y, is a positive number. Adjacent, adjacent is this line, the x coordinate, is a negative
Yep.
number. So positive divided by negative, as a result, the tangent in the second quadrant is a negative number.
Yep.
So far, okay?
Yep.
Yep. Then we clear this and go on to the third quadrant. Now, let us take one example in the third quadrant. Now, the third quadrant, there are angles between 180 and 270 degrees. 180 to 270 degrees, they are measured from the positive x-axis and go anti-clockwise. That is the size of this angle. Now, let us look at one example of an angle in the third quadrant. Oh, this is an angle in the third quadrant. You see the angle comes from where, It's from the positive x-axis, go anti-clockwise until the third quadrant here. Okay, so this is an example of an angle in the third quadrant. Now, what are the coordinates of this point in the third quadrant? The coordinate of this point in the third quadrant, they are both negative. The y coordinate is negative. The x coordinate is also negative because x is on the
Mm-hmm.
left, negative. Y at the bottom is also negative. Okay, this this is it. Now, what is the trigonometric ratio? This is the trigonometric ratio. Now, before that, let us identify the, this is the opposite. Now, this is the angle. Okay, this is the full angle. Now, actually, they are referring, this triangle is referring to this angle here. The right angle triangle is referring to this acute angle here. Okay, so this is the opposite. This is the adjacent. This is adjacent, and this is our hypotenuse. Now, if you want to find the sine trigonometric ratio, opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is this number. It is a negative number. Hypotenuse is always positive. So negative over positive is negative. So the sine in this quadrant, in the third quadrant, is negative. Okay.
Okay.
Let us look at the cosine. Cosine is adjacent. This one is adjacent. Adjacent over hypotenuse. How much is the adjacent? It's a negative number, negative 10.3. Of course, I'm showing you one example. In general, any angle in the third quadrant, when you move to the left-hand side, is always negative, right? But I give you one specific example, negative 10.13. Okay, in general, it can be any number, not necessarily 10.13. Any number in the third quadrant is always negative. Now,
Okay.
so the hypotenuse is positive. So negative over positive, or cosine is negative in the third quadrant. Now, if you want to look at the tangent, tangent is opposite over over adjacent. This is opposite. This is adjacent. This is our angle. This is the angle theta here. So both numbers, they are negative. Opposite is negative. Adjacent is also negative. Hey, how come I put positive? Positive pula. Okay. This is negative. Type wrongly. This is negative and negative. Both numbers, they are negative. So negative divided by negative, the tangent in the third quadrant is a positive number. Tangent in the third quadrant is a positive number. And one example of the angle is 207 degrees. So 207 from the positive x-axis until the third quadrant. So far, can understand?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we look at the
Quadrant.
last quadrant, the fourth quadrant. I hide all this so that you won't get confused. We look at the last quadrant. Okay, we take one example of an angle in the fourth quadrant. Okay, now in the fourth quadrant, the size of the angle is between 270 degrees and 360 degrees. So this line is 360. this line is 270. So all the angles here is between 270 and 360. So we take one specific example from this quadrant. So the specific example is 328 degrees. 328, how is it measured? Measured from the positive x-axis, go anti-clockwise until the fourth quadrant. Now that angle, the size of that angle in red color is 328. Okay, this is the angle. But in the third quadrant, in the fourth quadrant, what are the coordinates here? So the coordinates, they are, for example, positive 8.202 and negative 5.69. It means that the x coordinate is positive, but the y coordinate is negative. So if you want to find the trigonometric ratio, okay, the trigonometric ratio, again, which one is opposite? This is my opposite. This is the adjacent, right? And this is the hypotenuse. So these are the three lines. So we look at sine theta. Sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is this one, is a negative
Okay.
number. Hypotenuse is a positive number.
Positive.
So the sign in this quadrant is a negative number.
Positive.
Negative or positive?
Mm.
Now, how about cosine? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. This
Both
one,
positive.
yes, adjacent is positive. The hypotenuse is also positive. So as a result, cosine in
Yeah,
the
positive.
fourth quadrant is a positive number. Tangent, opposite,
Negative.
yes, opposite over adjacent. Opposite is negative, adjacent is positive. So when you divide a negative number with a positive number, you get
You get a negative number.
a negative number. Okay. Now, this is not the end yet. We have only identified the quadrant, which ratio is positive and which ratio is negative. Now, in order to find the angle, you need to know one more thing. What is that one more thing that you